this game. Now, I've given a handout. Some of you might have this in terms of the printed note in front of you already, but this is just an abstract game. You've seen the prisoner's dilemma, and I've painted a little bit of a story around it. This one, though, is totally abstract. This is a game, again, represented in its normal form, and in this game, there are two players. We've got player 1 and player 2. Player 1 chooses between top, middle, and bottom. Player 2 chooses between left, centre, and right. A very, very simple game. And these numbers represent the payoffs to the players. Those combinations. One player chooses one strategy, the other player chooses the other strategy. And remember that convention we went through last week? The numbers, the order in which we present them. The first figure, for example, the 0 there, top left, represents the payoff, what player 1 gets. The second figure, in this case, top left, represents the payoff to player 2. And all of the other combinations reflect the same thing, the same order of preferences. So, in this game, in this abstract game, there are 9 possible outcomes. So the question that we want to pose is, of those 9 possible outcomes, which one is most likely? Which one is most plausible? Well, when we looked at the prisoner's dilemma, it was simple. What did we do? We looked for the dominant strategy, or we looked for a strictly dominated strategy. And that led to an outcome in the prisoner's dilemma. What, though, about this game? Well, if you go through that game, there are no strictly dominated strategies to be eliminated, and hence there are no dominant strategies. So, for example, if we took player 1, for example, when would player 1 play top? When would player 2 play middle? When would player 1 play top? When would player 1 choose middle? And when would player 1 choose bottom? Well, if you look at those numbers there, it all depends on what player 2 does. So, for example, if player 2 were to play left, what would player 1 choose to do? Top, middle, or bottom? Middle. Yeah. If player 1 chose top, he would get a payoff of 0. If he chose middle, he'd get a payoff of 4. If he chose bottom, he'd get a payoff of 3. So, given that choice, player 1 would reason, well, if my opponent chooses left, I will choose to play middle and get a higher payoff. So that's what he would do under that scenario. But let's say that player 2 did not choose left, but rather chose centre. What would player 1 then do? Would choose, exactly, would then choose to play top, because that gives a higher payoff. Likewise, if player 2 had chosen right, player 1 would choose bottom and get a payoff of 6. So you can see what player 1 would choose to do depends upon what player 2 does. And hence, there is no dominant strategy. And yet our strategy for identifying, our procedure for identifying the most plausible outcome in these games previously relied upon that notion of a dominant strategy, of identifying a strictly dominated strategy. And so that simple approach that we've adopted so far doesn't really help. That would say, of all of those 9 possible outcomes, which one is the most likely? Well, they're all as likely, they're all plausible outcomes. So that doesn't really help us. So you can see, when we start moving to more complicated games more involved, that simple idea of the prisoner's dilemma, we're going to need something different. Something different to identify, can we finish with that by the way? To identify the most plausible outcome. And that something extra we're going to use is the ability to identify a Nash equilibrium. Now, a Nash equilibrium is a very much stronger equilibrium concept within the realms of game theory. Question is, though, what is a Nash equilibrium? Well, rather than giving you a formal definition, I just want you to think about this logic. So the first thing, any player. What would a rational player choose to do? Well, if you were playing a game against an opponent, you would want to choose a strategy that gives you your highest possible payoff, your best response. Look at everything you could do and choose that strategy, choose that response that is best, gives you the highest possible payoff. That makes perfect sense. That comes directly from our theory of rational choice. When, last year, you had your introduction to the theory of consumer choice, that consumers are choosing over bundles of goods with difference curves and budget constraints. What was the underlying assumption here? That consumers choose bundles that make themselves better off. That's the theory of rational choice. That's exactly what we're doing here. Players say, well, what could I do? Of all of those things I could do, I'll choose that course of action that gives me my highest, my best response. However, it doesn't finish there. Players will want to choose their best response on the proviso, though, that their opponents are also going to do something. They will want to play a best response given their belief about how the other players within the game are going to behave. And if you think that the other players in the game are also rational, by extension, you will say, well, those players will also choose their best response. And that is what a Nash equilibrium is. It's no more difficult than that. A Nash equilibrium we can sum up as that situation where all players within the game are choosing a best response, given that the other players in the game are also choosing a best response. So to really, really bring it down, a Nash equilibrium is a best response to a best response. But in an exam, if I ask you what a Nash equilibrium was, do I just want you to quote me something trite like that? No, I want you to demonstrate understanding. Think about what this idea of a Nash equilibrium is. All players are choosing a best response, given that they think all other players are choosing their own best responses. And if you think about it, what does that mean about a Nash equilibrium outcome? All players are choosing optimal strategies. Would any player in a Nash equilibrium have an incentive to deviate? Have an incentive to do something different? Well, if you look at our definition, the obvious answer to this is no. Because if you're choosing a best response, what incentive do you have to deviate? If you deviate, you choose something else that isn't a best response. So even though we've summarised this situation of what a Nash equilibrium is, it's a best response to a best response. All players in a Nash equilibrium are choosing their optimal strategy given what their opponent is doing. And as such then, no player would wish to do anything different and choose an alternative action. Now the natural extension to this then, what about those outcomes that aren't Nash equilibrium? What would that mean? Could that constitute a plausible outcome? Well, I just want you to reflect upon that definition that I gave. In a Nash equilibrium, all players are choosing optimal responses, best responses. So if you've got an outcome that isn't a Nash equilibrium, it means that at least one of the players is choosing an action that isn't a best response. So if you were a player and you weren't choosing an optimal response, a best response, what would you do? Something different. Hence, an outcome that isn't a Nash equilibrium cannot plausibly be the outcome of the game, because at least one of the players has an incentive to do something else. And everything that you've learned about economics before, the concept of an equilibrium, it's an outcome towards which we gravitate. And once we arrive there, there's no incentive to move away. Well, that's exactly what I've just said, that incentive to deviate. If we're not in a Nash equilibrium, there's an incentive to choose a different strategy. Once we are in a Nash equilibrium, there is no incentive to choose a different strategy, and hence that is our equilibrium outcome. Now, I've talked around this a little bit. I wouldn't expect you at this particular juncture to really appreciate everything of what I've said there. If you don't worry. The easiest way to appreciate what a Nash equilibrium is to identify them, talk through them. And that is what I'm going to do in the next few examples. But I'll also use this as an opportunity to introduce you to different classes of game, different types of games. Our first game, though, that we're going to see, isn't a new game. That was just the abstract game that we saw a few minutes ago. But what I want to do is, in games presented in this normal form, how do we identify the Nash equilibrium? So that's going to be the most important thing. Identify it correctly first of all. Then, once you've identified it, then we can start to interpret it and say exactly why is it a Nash equilibrium. So, mechanically, in a game like this, in a two-player game like this, the idea, the process that we would follow to identify the Nash equilibrium is very, very simple. We would say, for each player and each possible strategy of that player, what's the optimal or best response of the other player? It's as simple as that. Any game that you'll see in lectures, in seminars, heaven forbid, in your exam in January, exactly the same. Just follow that very, very simple rubric. So, for each player and for each possible strategy of that player, what's the best response of the other? Well, let's take the optimal responses of player 1 initially. So, if you want to find the optimal responses of player 1, this is conditioned upon what player 2 does. And this will link back to those questions that I asked you 5 minutes ago. Player 1 and player 2 was doing. So, for example, if player 1 chose left, the optimal response of player 1 is to choose top and get a pair for 0, middle and get a pair for 4, or bottom and get a pair for 3. 4, 0 and 3. You already identified this previously. The optimal response under that scenario, if player 2 chooses left, is for player 1 to choose middle. And hence, I've put that circle around the 4 to denote that choosing middle is a best response. It's the optimal response. It's the best thing that player 1 can do if player 2 chooses left. Then moving on, were player 2 to choose centre, player 1 chooses top and gets a pair for 4, middle and a pair for 0, or bottom and a pair for 3. Naturally, player 1 is going to choose top. Exactly. So again, I'll put that circle around 4 to denote that top is an optimal response. And then lastly, were player 2 to choose right, player 1 chooses between top and middle, receiving a pair for 5, or bottom and receiving a pair for 6. Naturally, the optimal response is to choose bottom. So again, I'll put that circle around, and that denotes the optimal response. Now that's it for player 1. Those are all the optimal responses for player 1. We'll choose middle if 2 chooses left, top if 2 chooses centre, and bottom if 2 chooses right. And that's it for player 1. Now let's do exactly the same for player 2. If player 1 were to choose top, what would player 2 do? Top, what would player 2 do? Yeah. Well, we're talking about player 2, so we're looking at the second figure. So there you go. If player 2 chooses left, he gets a pair for 4. Centre gets a pair for 0. Right gets a pair for 3. Obviously 4 is a better outcome than either 0 or 3. And so that is what player 2 will choose to do. Choose left. If player 1 chooses middle, player 2 chooses between middle, chooses between left, centre and right. And he will choose centre exactly. Well done. And then lastly, were player 1 to choose bottom, player 2 would choose right, exactly. Left gives 5, centre gives 5, and right gives 6. Now what suddenly jumps out at you from that? You've all been studying economics long enough to realise, hold on, there's only one cell that's got 2 circles. That probably means something, and it does. That there, that outcome there of bottom right is our Nash equilibrium. It's the only cell outcome in which the 2 circles coincide. All of the other possible combinations, because they've either got 0 or just a solitary circle, don't accord with that idea of a Nash equilibrium. And if you think about our definition, that should be plainly obvious. We said in a Nash equilibrium, all players are choosing optimal responses. And we've denoted those circles as an optimal response. So there's only one combination here where both players are choosing optimal responses, best responses. And there you go. That is bottom left. The other ones means either one of the players is not choosing optimal response, or both players aren't choosing optimal responses. And from our definition before, well, that's not a Nash equilibrium. And as such then, if it's not a Nash equilibrium, it's not a plausible outcome. So in this game here, of the 9 possible outcomes, the only one that's really plausible is that one there, bottom right. Our Nash equilibrium where both circles coincide. But were I to ask you the question though, just think about this. Would either player have an incentive to deviate? Now the way that I've set this example up is very, very simple. That Nash equilibrium, they get the 60s, the highest payoff regardless. Think about what I also said about a Nash equilibrium. Does either of the players have an incentive to deviate, do something different? Hopefully you can see that the obvious answer, lots and lots of shaking heads, the answer exactly is no. So let's just reinforce this point. Let's look for player 1. That's our Nash equilibrium there. The payoff to player 1 is 6. He's getting that, and his rival is choosing to play right. So the question player 1 would ask himself is, given that my rival, player 2, is choosing to play right, would I wish to choose any other strategy apart from bottom? And the answer, as you've correctly identified, is no. By choosing bottom, player 1 gets a pair for 6. Were he to choose either middle or top, he would get a lower payoff, an inferior outcome. So does player 1 have an incentive to deviate? No. There's no reason why player 1 would change what he's doing. There's no reason why he would want to move away from that Nash equilibrium. And exactly the same for player 2. In the Nash equilibrium, player 2 has a payoff of 6. And his rival is choosing bottom. Well, given that, would player 2 ever wish to play centre or left? The answer must be no. If he chose centre, his payoff would go from 6 to 5. It's worse. If he chose to play left, it would go from 6 to 5 again. It's worse. So again, player 2 has no incentive to deviate. So for all of those possible outcomes, the one that's most plausible, the one that accords with the idea of a Nash equilibrium, is that one there, bottom right. So that is what a Nash equilibrium is. But it's really, really crucial that you're able to identify this. So I'm just going to go through, for this remainder of this first half of the lecture, I'm going to go through a couple of extra examples, just to reinforce this idea, but also use it as an opportunity to introduce you to different classes of commonly used games in game theory. The first one, though, isn't a new class of game. The first one, I want to revisit that example of the prisoner's dilemma. And the reason I want to revisit this example is to show you that it's the way that the game is formulated, the preferences of the players, the outcome that we get, the incentives that players face. That's what would make a game a prisoner's dilemma. Now, when we saw it previously, it was quite literally two prisoners choosing to deny or confess. But that doesn't make it a prisoner's dilemma. What makes it the prisoner's dilemma is the structure and the nature of the game. So, for that reason, what I'm going to do is take another example of the prisoner's dilemma and just couch it in terms of a different example. It's still a prisoner's dilemma, but the story I'm going to talk around is going to be different. And this example that I'm going to give you, this example of the prisoner's dilemma, is going to be of two students working on a joint project. So let's say this could well be the assignment, the group coursework that you need to do for the end of term. And you, as participants, you, as the players within this game, have the choice to put in one of two levels of effort. You can either work really, really hard as you possibly can, and contribute towards the group, or, hopefully this won't be the case, or you can put in no effort whatsoever. You can shirk. So you either put lots of effort in and work hard, or you shirk. So those are the two pre-described levels of effort. So let's take a two-player version of this game as before. So we've got our two students, Bill and Ben. We've got the two available strategies to work hard or shirk, and then these numbers just represent the preferences of these two students. Now, the nature of these preferences and the way that these outcomes are ordered is exactly the same as we saw previously with our two prisoners. Rather, though, than representing number of years in prison, I've just used the figures 0, 1, 2 and 3 to order the preferences, where 0 is the least preferred outcome, where 3 is the most preferred outcome. And if you talk through this example, listen for this example, you'll see that it represents exactly the same sort of game as we described previously, with the prisoners choosing to deny or confess. So, for both of the students, their most preferred outcome, the thing that they would love to happen, is where they get a 3. And you'll see, by the way, this game is symmetrical. So whatever we say for one student is exactly the same for the other student. And for both of them, for both Bill and Ben, their most preferred outcome, where they get the 3, is that they shirk, that is, they put in 0 effort, but the other person works hard. What happens then? The assignment gets completed, But the person, in this case, Bill, we're talking about that bottom left there, Bill puts in no effort whatsoever, yet he still passes the assignment. Because Ben has put all the hard work in and completed the assignment on his own. So for Bill, that's his most preferred outcome. And exactly the same if we go to the top right there. 3 is the most preferred outcome for Ben, where he shirks and Bill puts in all the hard work. So that's the most preferred outcome for both players. Now the second most preferred outcome, where both players get a pair of 2, is where they both work hard. The project gets completed. It's of an even higher quality than if only one of them puts the effort in. But that extra quality doesn't compensate for the extra effort that's expended. So that's the second most preferred outcome. Next on the list, where they both get a payoff of 1, is where they both shirk. They both shirk, no one puts in any effort whatsoever, and they fail the assignment. That's not the worst outcome though. The absolute worst outcome, the outcome that neither Bill nor Ben wants, is to think that the other person has got one over on them. What they do not want to happen, this is where they get the zeros, is to put effort in, is to work hard, and their colleague, their fellow student, puts in no effort whatsoever. But the other person free rides. That's the least preferred outcome. That's the one they really, really don't want to happen. So that then is exactly the same. The incentives, the nature of that game is exactly the same. I've talked around it. The example is different, but that is still a prisoner's dilemma. It's exactly the same. The incentives within the game are exactly the same. The outcome is still exactly the same. So, formally, I'll just work through this game just to identify the Nash equilibrium using that rubric that we set up previously. So, if Ben was to work hard, what would Bill want to do? He would want to shirk, exactly. If Ben were to shirk, what would Bill want to do? Also shirk. Again, those circles denote optimal responses. But what are we expecting from a prisoner's dilemma? We're expecting there to be a dominant strategy. When we looked at the prisoners, the dominant strategy was always to confess, not to cooperate with the other person. What have we found for Bill? He has a dominant strategy of shirking, not cooperating with his fellow student. So there's a dominant strategy, the dominant strategy of shirking. And then for fullness, let's complete it now for Ben's optimal responses. So if Bill were to work hard, Ben works hard with a payoff of 2, or shirks and gets a payoff of 3. Obviously 3 is preferred to 2, and so that denotes, the circle denotes, his optimal response. And then lastly, if Bill were to shirk, Ben working hard gets a payoff of 0, also shirking gets a payoff of 1. So 1 again is the optimal response. So what does that suggest? We got a single Nash equilibrium, a single plausible outcome, where both players are choosing their dominant strategy. In this case, the dominant strategy is to shirk. But again, look at this outcome. This is what makes it a prisoner's dilemma. That single equilibrium outcome. A dominant strategy. But also, the outcome, the equilibrium outcome, where they both get a payoff of 1, is obviously inferior to that one there, where they both worked hard. That's the nature of a prisoner's dilemma. The question is, do you cooperate with the other person? There are obviously benefits or incentives to cooperate, and if the players can agree to cooperate with one another, they will both be better off. But the whole point about the prisoner's dilemma, this incentive to cooperate is dominated by that outcome there. We don't cooperate with your fellow player. That, though, is a prisoner's dilemma. That is another example of the prisoner's dilemma. Are you all getting the idea now about how to identify a Nash equilibrium? Fairly straightforward? Yeah? Okay. I will get you tutors to go over this again in seminars. So the next two examples, I'll go a little bit more quickly then. So, that's the idea of the prisoner's dilemma. And you're all comfortable with how you identify the Nash equilibrium. Well, I'll give you two final games before I give you a break. And in this next game, it isn't a game about cooperation. What we rely upon here in the prisoner's dilemma, do you cooperate or not with your fellow players? In this next game I'm going to show you, cooperation is given. The players in the game want to cooperate with one another. However, what's different though is that they disagree on the best form that cooperation should take. And this game, this class of game, is known as the Battle of the Sexes. And, as will become fairly obvious in a few minutes, the initial exposition of this game relates back to the 1950s. And in this game, a man and a woman are deciding upon where they go for their evening's entertainment. Now, their available choices, the two venues they can go to, are either the opera or a prize fight. So that is what they're choosing over. So our two players are the man and the woman. And each chooses the venue that they would like to go to. Is it the opera, or is it the opera, or is it the prize fight? So that's the basic game that we've got. We've got the players, we've got the options. What we haven't said anything about so far, though, are their preferences. What would the man prefer? What would the woman prefer? And again, what about that first bullet point? About that they want to cooperate with one another. Well, in terms of their preferences, in this battle of the sexes, the most important thing for the man and the woman, absolutely, is that they spend the evening together. That's the most important consideration. That overrides everything. It doesn't matter it's the opera, it doesn't matter it's the prize fight, they just want to be together. So that's the first thing. However, so that's the cooperation point. However, the man would much prefer that they spent the evening together at the prize fight. Whereas the woman would much rather that they spent the evening together at the opera. So what I've done here, I've set the game up perfectly for you. I've told you the players, I've told you their strategies, and I've told you their preferences. From that, you should be able to formulate the normal form representation. Now, this is what I've done in lecture so far. When we started off with the prisoner's dilemma, I set the game up for you in word form. Again, I've set the game up for you in word form. I just wanted to think about this, because this is moving forward and looking towards your exams. Typical questions that I'd ask on this in exam, I would give you that information there. I said, okay, now you use numbers to represent that game in its normal form. And on the seminars that you've been doing this week, there's an example where you've got to do exactly that. But that's the reason I set the game up for you. And you need to identify 3 key points. The players, man and the woman, it's fairly obvious. The strategies that they can choose, prize fight, opera, again that's fairly obvious. But these preferences I've given you here will then denote in your game what numbers that you put in there. How do these players rank the preferences? How do they rank the various outcomes? That is what I've told you there. That's something that I'd expect you to be able to do, and you'll practice as this course unfolds. That's something that I'd expect you to be able to do in an exam question. So, that's the basic setup. Given that then, I've just put some numbers in, 0, 1 and 2, to represent these preferences. Now on the handout, it's in front of you. You can get it from the overheads as well if you want. But this is the game. So, we've got the man and the woman. We've got the available strategies to go to the prize fight or to go to the opera. So what did we say? The first thing, the man and the woman want to be together. They don't want to be apart. So the least preferred outcome for both of them is when they get 0, is when one goes to the fight, the other goes to the opera. So that's the least preferred outcome. More preferred is when they go to the opera together or the prize fight together. Well, the man would much rather that they went to the prize fight together. So he gets his highest outcome, the 2, when they both go to the prize fight. The woman, though, gets her most preferred outcome when they go to the opera together. And that, as we've set it up, is the battle of the sexes. Question is, where is the Nash equilibrium? Well, unlike what we saw with the prisoner's dilemma, there is not a single Nash equilibrium, but rather there are going to be 2. So, let's formally, and we'll do this really, really quickly this time. Formally, how would we identify the Nash equilibrium? For each player, each possible strategy of that player, what's the optimal response of the other? So, if the man goes to the opera, the woman will choose to go to the opera as well. Pair of 2, as opposed to a pair of 0. If the man goes to the prize fight, the woman would also choose to go to the prize fight. Exactly. Circle round denotes optimal responses. And then the optimal responses for the man. If the woman goes to the opera, the man will choose to go opera. And then lastly, if the woman goes to the prize fight, the man will also go to the prize fight. And hence, what we found in this game, there are 2 Nash equilibria. But again, remember what I said before, we're talking about classes of game. Now this is specifically related to a man and a woman choosing where to go, but it's that class of game. It's a game of cooperation, but where you just disagree on the exact form that cooperation should take. So in this game, there are 2 instances where the circles coincide. So, of the 4 possible outcomes, which is the most likely? Which is the most plausible? Well, what would you say? Which is the most likely? Which is the most plausible? Well, a lot of you, I know what's running through your mind, but that's exactly it. And we're going to return to this right at the end of our last slide today. Okay? But you look at these 2 outcomes. There are 2 Nash equilibria. One where they both go to the opera. One where they both go to the prize fight. But is either more likely? Is either more plausible? When they both go to the opera, the woman is better off. She gets her most preferred outcome. When they both go to the prize fight, the man is better off. He gets his most preferred outcome. But if we look at it, there's no reason to suppose that either of those outcomes are more likely. So all we've done, when we start this game off, there are 4 possible outcomes. What's our notion, our idea of a Nash equilibrium allowed us to do? Well, we've restricted it to 2 possible or 2 plausible outcomes. And what I want you to start thinking about, the assignment that we did, that I talked through your assignment brief last time. In games where there are multiple Nash equilibria, how does the notion of a focal point lead to a single plausible outcome? What have we got here? A game where there are multiple Nash equilibria. Of these two outcomes, which one is most likely? Well, at the moment, you don't know. Soon, fingers crossed, you will. Okay? But for the moment, all we can say in this game, in any game, it is possible to identify multiple Nash equilibria. But this game, neither is more likely. Or we could say it could be both going to the opera, it could be both going to the prize fund. And that's it. We can't say anything else. Contrast that, though, with what we're going to find in this next game. This will be the last game I give you before I give you the break. And this next class of game is known as the stag hunt. Now, in the stag hunt, the way that we set up this game is that there is a group of hunters. And these hunters are involved in the pursuit of a stag. Now, in terms of the hunt, each of the hunters will be assigned a very specific job to do. They'll be assigned a very specific post. So that's their job. And if all the hunters involved in this stag hunt remain attentive to their posts, they are guaranteed to catch the stag. Absolutely, the stag will not escape. But it involves each and every one of the hunters remaining attentive and pursuing the stag. Because the problem is, if only one of the hunters deserts his post, the stag is guaranteed to get away. So all of the players need to do the job that they've been assigned. Every single one of them. And that's the problem. Because each of the hunters also has an incentive. And that incentive is that rather in being involved in this hunt and pursuing the stag, alternatively, they'll just go off and chase rabbits. They'll hunt a rabbit instead. And if they do that, they are absolutely guaranteed to catch that rabbit. However, it's also guaranteed that the stag will escape. So the hunters there have got two available strategies, two choices to them. Do I pursue the stag and do what I'm supposed to do, or do I go off chasing and hunting rabbits? So that's the game that we've got. What, though, about the outcomes? What about the preferences of the players? Well, the most preferred outcome is that they get something, and that something is the stag. So you've got two available choices. You go on the hunt, you either get something or you get nothing. Well, in terms of the something that the hunters could get, they would much rather have a share of the stag. They prefer that to having a rabbit which they have for themselves. The least preferred outcome, though, the worst possible scenario, is where the hunter is left empty-handed. That they pursued the stag, and therefore they haven't caught a rabbit. But someone else has pursued rabbits, and the stag has escaped, so they get nothing. That's the least preferred outcome. So, we've done exactly the same. I've given you, in word form, the way that this game is set up. We've got the players, we've got the strategies, and we've got the preferences. So, let's take a two-player version of this game and represent that game I've just described in its normal form. So, normal form, remember we need three characteristics, three aspects. The players, we'll say, Hunter 1 and Hunter 2. The available strategies to pursue the stag or to pursue the rabbit, and then the preferences, the payoffs. So I've just used the numbers 0, 1 and 2 just to rank the outcomes in the same way as we saw previously. Both hunters get the highest payoff, get the payoff of 2, when they receive a share of the stag. But they will only have this share when both of the hunters pursue the stag. So there you go. Both hunters in that top left get the highest payoff of 2. The next preferred outcome is just to get the rabbit. And any hunter, for example hunter 1, will always catch a rabbit if he pursues it. So he gets a payoff of 1 there, bottom left, a payoff of 1 there, bottom right. And then he gets a payoff of 0. Either hunter would get a payoff of 0. So bottom left there, top right there. Either player gets the least preferred outcome, that payoff of 0, when he would pursue the stag whilst his fellow hunter pursues the rabbit. That's the least preferred payoff. So that is just putting these numbers there to represent this game in normal form. That is the nature of this game, is the stag hunt. So where's the Nash equilibrium? Let's go through this really, really quickly. If hunter 2 pursues the stag, the optimal response from hunter 1 is also to pursue the stag. Hunter 2 pursues the stag. Hunter 1 says stag, payoff of 2, rabbit, payoff of 1. Circle denotes the optimal response. If hunter 2 pursues the rabbit, hunter 1 will also pursue the rabbit. Well done. And then, just to complete it, if hunter 1 pursues the stag, hunter 2 will pursue the stag, and hunter 1 pursues rabbit, hunter 2 will. Here we go. So, there are now 2 Nash equilibria. One where they both remain attentive to the hunt and pursue the stag, and the other where neither remains attentive to the hunt and they go off pursuing rabbits. So again, as we saw with Battle of the Sexes, there are 4 possible outcomes, but 2 of them suggest themselves as more plausible, more likely. There are 2 Nash equilibria. Here, where they both pursue rabbits, and here, here, where they both pursue the stag, and here, bottom right, where they both pursue the rabbit. Which one of those is more likely? Well, now we can say something. When we looked at Battle of the Sexes, there was no reason to think that either of these outcomes dominated the other. One, the man was better off, and the other, the woman was better off. But if we look at that Nash equilibrium where they both pursue the stag, what's instantly obvious? Both players can get a higher payoff. That Nash equilibrium there, both players get a payoff of 2, where they both pursue the stag. The alternative Nash equilibrium, where they both pursue the rabbit, only gives a payoff of 1 to both players. For that reason, we would describe that Nash equilibrium there, where they both pursue the stag, as a focal point. It suggests itself as a more likely, a more plausible outcome. Now, in terms of what I've given you so far, I've only described the reason that being a focal point is because both players are better off. Now, more generally, what a focal point is just a strategy combination that, for whatever reason, allows the players to coordinate their actions. Now, at this particular juncture, it's this part here. It stands out in some way. In this game that we've seen of the stag hunt, why does that particular Nash equilibrium stand out? Because both players are better off. And hence, it suggests itself as a more plausible outcome. However, that part there, focal points are strategy combinations that stand out in some way and around which players can coordinate. Question is, what do we mean they stand out in some way? Now, for the moment, this is really, really hand-wavy. What describes, what leads to a focal point? What more meat can we put around that expression? That is what you are going to have to do for your assignment, and that is what we're going to do in the next part of this lecture. What makes an outcome more likely? Why are certain outcomes more likely? What is a focal point? Well, to illustrate this, I want to give you a number of games, examples of focal points. But in all of these games that we're going to go through, all these games that we're going to play, the crucial part is that there are multiple Nash equilibria, multiple outcomes that we could have. But for whatever reason, some of these outcomes are more likely. That's the whole thing about a focal point. So, the games that we're going to run through, there'll be 5 different games, a couple of variations of them. And the first game relates to the fact that, can you all see that? Is that big enough there? If you look at that game there, that is your exam paper for January. If only you could turn that page over and see what's coming next. So that's your exam paper for January. And the reason I showed you that is I want you all to do fantastically well. And so I think, well, what's the best way of ensuring that you do well? It's not to teach you as brilliantly as I teach you, but rather it's to give you a copy of the exam paper. I should say, by the way, this is totally hypothetical. But, okay, so I'm concerned that come January, you're not going to do particularly well in the exam. So I said, okay, what I'll do, I'll give you all a copy of this exam paper. But what I can't do is email it to you. If I do that, there's a trail. Someone might intercept that email, see that I've sent you that. So I've got to think of something else. So I said, what I'll do is I'll meet you all on Saturday. I've got the exam paper, I've printed it off, and I'll come and meet you on Saturday. And I've said, what we'll do is we'll meet outside the Great Hall. So I've got a copy of the exam paper. If you're there, I'll give you a copy of the exam paper. I'll come in nice and quickly. You there, exam paper, and we'll be gone. But in all of this rush, I've told you where we're going to meet. I've told you it's going to be on Saturday. And I didn't specify a time. Now you want to turn up at the same time as me. So we turn up on a Saturday and we're hanging around the Great Hall. The security guys are going to see us and they'll move us on. So we need to turn up at the same time. If we turn up at the same time, I can give you the exam paper. Works for me and it works for you. So you can see here there are multiple Nash equilibria. All those times that we turn up together at the same time. But problem is, what time are you going to turn up? I said, this is exam paper. I'll meet you outside the Great Hall on Saturday. Now, it's not as if I had a time in my mind and I just forgot to tell you. I just didn't say the time. So now I've got to think, what time are you going to turn up? You've got to think, what time am I going to turn up? We need to be there at the same time. If we don't turn up at the same time, we're lost. Okay? So what we'll want to do, it's not thinking about this, oh well, what time do I get up? Or what time could I make other things on a Saturday? You've got to think. You want to choose a time that you think I'm going to pick. I've got to pick a time I think you're going to pick. You've got to try and arrive at the same time. So, we'll play a little game. First of all, I want everyone to think what time, don't speak to the person next to you, just think, okay, what time could you turn up? Okay, just take a moment, what time could you turn up? I'm going to ask volunteers, I'm just going to take the first 2 rows, okay? Now I should stress, somebody started getting nervous now, don't worry, absolutely, with all of these games that we're going to play, there is no right answer, there is no wrong answer. Absolutely not. I just want to think, you to tell me what time you are going to turn up. And see if it coordinates with the time that I'm going to turn up. Okay? You've got to try and get in each other's minds. What time you turn up, what time I turn up. So, I'm just going to do the first 2 rows. Whatever everyone else says, don't think about your time. Do not change it. Okay? Don't change it for what anyone else says. Just your own time. Okay. And then I'll tell you what time I'm going to turn up. You all got your times? Yeah. And everyone else do exactly the same. And think if what they say resonates with you. Okay. What time?
6.
6 in the evening, in the morning? 6, okay. 6 p.m.
6 a.m.
6 a.m. Okay. Is that when you get to go to the library naturally? Yeah. But I said, with this, just to reiterate, there are no right answers, no wrong answers. But the important thing is that you're saying a time that you also think that I'm going to turn up as well. Okay. 10 a.m. 10 a.m. 12 noon. Okay.
2 p.m.
2 p.m. Is that when you get up? Possibly, okay. 2 p.m.
11 a.m.
11 a.m. Okay. What time would you say? 10 a.m. Okay. 9 a.m. Put that one there.
10 a.m.
10 a.m. 1 a.m. Okay. Okay. 11:30 a.m. p.m. a.m. 2 p.m. Okay. I've got not there's anything wrong with any of the responses that you've given, but I've never played this game before, and I've not got people saying, well, most people say the same reason, but there's no right answer, there's no wrong answer. Has everyone else got their responses? Yeah? No one change it. The time I chose was 12 noon. Did anyone else choose 12 noon? Okay, handful of you. Okay? In itself, that doesn't matter. First of all, I'll give you my line of all the times. What are the Nash equilibrium? The Nash equilibrium is we both choose the same time. So, for example, if I chose 12 noon, and we had our friend at the front who chose, was it 1 a.m.? Or maybe you meant 1 p.m., did you? Yeah, 1 p.m., okay. But the fact here is we turn up at different times. Given that I turned up at 12, given that you turned up at 1, would you wish to change the time that you've chosen?
It's very late.
Well, exactly, it's not the same time as me. So, if what you want to do is turn up at the same time as me, if you turned up at a different time, you then would have an incentive to choose something else. Yep. So therefore, that outcome, where I chose 12 noon, and you chose 1 p.m., cannot be a Nash equilibrium, because you would therefore have an incentive to do something different. I, myself, would have an incentive to do something different, because we're not turning up at the same time. But why did I choose 12 noon? Well, there's something about 12 noon, high noon, the mid part of the day. Now maybe a lot of you are thinking about connotations of this, and there's something extra in there, or what time the buses arrive. There's nothing at all to do with that. Just what time do you think I was going to turn up? What time would you turn? But even though that 12 noon one person did say 12 noon, who said 12 noon, extra marks in the exam for you, don't worry. I'll get your student number on the way out. But only one person chose 12 noon, it says me, and a few people at the back. But what do you notice about all but one of these responses?
It's on the hour.
They're all on the hour. Now, I didn't say you have to choose something on the hour, or indeed something on the half hour. But all of these responses, and I guess, quick show of hands, if you would, who else chose a time that was on the hour? Yeah? Vast lot. On one side, we just gravitate towards these times. Of all the outcomes that we could have chosen, if we both turned up at 3 minutes past 11, that would have been a Nash equilibrium. Neither of us would have an incentive to do anything different. We could have turned up at 11:15 or 11:30, but the vast majority of outcomes, we gravitate towards certain outcomes. And indeed, when these sorts of games are played, and whenever I play this info, the predominant response is 12 noon. We're led towards certain outcomes. So here, in this game that we've set up, there are many, multiple Nash equilibria. But certain of these outcomes suggest themselves as more likely. For the moment, given what we've identified here, the more likely outcomes are those that are on the hour. So rather than there being virtually infinite set of Nash equilibria, we've restricted it down to we both turn up at 1, or we both turn at 2, or both turn up at 3. So we've narrowed that set down. These would all be examples of focal points. And potentially, 12 noon might be seen as a even more of a focal point than any of these times in the hour. But again, that doesn't really make a difference. It's still that same principle coming through. Certain outcomes, these ones on the hour, are more likely. And when outcomes are more likely, for whatever reason, when it gives us something around which we can coordinate actions, they are described as focal points. So certain Nash equilibria are more likely. So that was our first game. That sort of worked and sort of doesn't. I've got not much confidence now for the games that follow, but regardless, doesn't matter. Okay, this second game that we're going to play, the idea about picking a number. Don't shout anything out, but what I would want you to do is play a game with me, and that game is going to be a monetary reward. I'm not going to get any money out, but let's say that there was £10 on offer, and this is the game that we play. If we're playing this game and we pick the same number, any number, single digit between 1 and 9. If you pick the same number as me, we win a cash prize. If we pick different numbers, we don't win. So you can see, if we pick different numbers, would we have an incentive to do something different? Yes. If we pick the same number, do we have an incentive to choose something different? No. So, all those outcomes where we pick the same number are Nash equilibrium. So if I picked 1 and you picked 1 at the same time, that would be a Nash equilibrium. If I picked 2 at the same time as you picked 2, that would be a Nash equilibrium. So, I know what number, I've thought about it, numbers between 1 and 9. I know what number I'm going to pick. The question is, what number are you going to pick? Now, it's not a case of picking a random number. It's not a case of picking a random number. You've got to pick a number that you think I'm going to pick. I've got to pick a number that I think you're going to pick. So in this game, there are 9 possible Nash equilibria. You both choose 1, both choose 2, both choose 3, all the way up to where we both choose 9. Either are any of these outcomes more likely. So rather than asking volunteers, just a quick and a simple show of hands. I know what number I'm going to choose. Everyone now know what number they're going to choose? Yeah? Okay. Who chooses 1? Just show of hands. Okay? I said, no right answers, no wrong answers. Apart from number 1. Okay. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So what did most people pick? Same as me. There you go. Hey, well done. So that does mean, by the way, each and every one of you chose 7. I do now owe you £10. Okay. So of all of these outcomes, there are 9 Nash equilibria, but one of them suggested itself as more likely. That number 7. What? It's that lucky 7. There are 7 days of the week. There are 7 seas. There are 7 colours of the rainbow. There are the 7 wonders of the ancient world. The number 7 has got all of these connotations of good luck associated with it. And therefore, because of that, we gravitate towards the number 7. But the fact that we chose number 7 has got an awful lot to do with the context in which I've asked this question. So let's just change it ever so slightly. And I'll ask you, we're going to play exactly the same game, but I'm going to say, let's say we're doing exactly the same game, but in China. And I'm going to ask you a few questions before we start this. Okay, Beijing Olympics, when was it held? 2008. What month was it held?
August.
The 8th month. What date did it start? 8th of August. What time was the opening ceremony? What time did it start? 8 p.m. So therefore, 8 p.m, 8th day of the 8th month, 2008. And why is that? And I do apologise for my pronunciation in the front. What we have in Chinese, you've got ba and fa. So very, very similar. And the idea, ba meaning number 8, and fa is associated with prosperity, good luck. So in Chinese culture, number 8 is associated with good luck. If you ever travel on airlines and you look at the departure codes, if you fly from London to Hong Kong with BA, what's the flight code? BA 88. If you fly from Amsterdam on KLM to Chengdu, what's the flight code? KLM 888. If you go, not always the case, but if you look at departure flight boards next to the airport and look at the flight codes, invariably those going to China have 8 in the title for all of these connotations of good luck. So were I to repeat this game in a Chinese setting, in a group of students in a Chinese lecture theatre, the chances are, because of all these connotations that 8 has with good luck, the number that I get back is more likely to be the number 8. And again, that would lead to a focal point in this game. So the more likely outcome would be, will we both choose 8 as a both choose 7. So again, it's trying to unpick that part that I said at the beginning. Focal points are outcomes that are more likely for whatever reason. This is very much a behavioural and psychological context. There's nothing definitively that we can say that proves this, but it's just certain outcomes for whatever reason are more likely. And as you can see, the social context here is also important. So, another game. Again, it's building upon this idea of social context. And I'll show you in a moment why I'm saying we're building upon this idea of social context. Exactly the same game where we've got to pick a number. And if our numbers coincide, we both win. This time though, rather than choosing numbers between 1 and 9, I want you to choose any 3-digit number. Anywhere between 100, 100, and 999. So, if we choose the same number, we win. If we choose different numbers, it means that we haven't won. And as such then, we'd have an incentive, we would have had an incentive to choose a different number. And if that's the case, we can't be at a Nash equilibrium. So all of these outcomes where we choose the same number is a Nash equilibrium. Is there any reason to believe any of those match combinations is more likely? Okay? So again, think I've chosen what my number is. You've got to think you want to choose the same number as me. I want to choose the same number as you. Okay? Everyone thought of your number? Yep. No, we're not going to go through this hands up who chose 100, 101. That would take an awful long time. Just to the number I chose, 777. Did anyone choose that? Okay, a few of you, but not many. So you're probably thinking, hold on, you've told us all this. This has all fallen apart. It's not worked again. But that's the exact point. The reason I chose 777 because of this talk, that discussion that we had previously, that 7 being a lucky number. I wouldn't expect most people to have chosen the same number as me. This is where the idea of social context comes in. So we're now going to play exactly the same game, but now imagine. You came here at 4 o'clock for a microeconomics lecture. But let's say you came down here, came on the bus, 4 o'clock into this lecture theatre, not for a microeconomics lecture, but let's all say we're devil worshippers. We're Satanists, okay? And we've all come down for a conference, a convention. And then I played this exact same game with you. And I said, what I want to do is now choose a 3-digit number. And if we choose the same number, we win. Right? So all we've done is exactly the same game, but I've just changed the social context. So, I've thought of my number. A bit of culture here, a bit of William Blake for you. What number would you choose? And the number of the beast is? There you go. We've changed that social context slightly. And then of all of those Nash equilibria we could have chosen, the one that suggests itself as more likely is that one we both choose the number 666. That therefore is a focal point, but it's conditioned upon the social context within which we're playing the game. This one often doesn't work. Okay? So you also volunteer. What was your name, sorry? Diego. Diego. Okay. So Diego in the front. Pack of cards. I said not randomly pick a card. Just a pack of cards. Okay? What Diego's going to do is think of the card I'm going to pick. And I'm going to think of the card he's going to pick. If we pick the same card, we win the game. Okay? Okay, Diego. No right answer, no wrong answer. Of all the... What card are you going to say? King of Hearts. Did you hear Diego at the front? For those who couldn't hear Diego at the front, he said Ace of Spades. Well done. Well done, Diego. But sometimes works, sometimes it doesn't. But let's reinforce this idea about social context. Let's say that we're playing this game, and Diego and I are avid readers of Lewis Carroll. Lewis Carroll is our favourite author. And our favourite book of all time is Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. Or Alice in Wonderland, what's commonly known as. And then we said this exact same game. We've now got to choose a card. You pick a card, I pick a card. What would you choose? There you go. Let's change the context, eh? Most likely outcome. In this game, there would be 52 Nash equilibria. We could both choose the Ace of Spades, the Two of Spades, Three of Spades, all the way through. If we choose the same card, that's our Nash equilibrium. But again, just changing that social context slightly. And when we do that, certain outcomes suggest themselves as more likely. So if we're both enthusiasts of Lewis Carroll, I think much more likely. We're not saying definitively, absolutely it's guaranteed, but it just makes certain outcomes more likely. Hence, in this particular game, the Queen of Hearts would be a focal point, a certain Nash equilibrium that's more likely. A focal point. Okay, last game then. Now the idea, we've talked about social settings, social conventions. But something we haven't mentioned so far, and it's equally important, are judgments. And when people, after all, that's what we're talking about here. Why do players, why do individuals choose certain outcomes? Why do they choose to do certain things? It's not just social convention that's important, but also social judgments, where people are concerned what others think about them. So, with that in mind, we'll play our final game. And in this game, we have £50. And I'll choose a volunteer in a moment. We are going to split £50. And if the shares that we identify exactly sum to £50, we get those shares that we identified. So, for example, if we just think about whole numbers, don't think about pennies and pence and half pounds. We just think of £1, £2, £3, £4. If me, my fellow player, chooses a share, and they both sum to £100, so for example, I might just say that the share is £50, I get £50. And you might say, well, the share should be 0 to you and £50 to me. We both identify those same shares. They sum to 50. We get to keep our shares. I'd get my £50. You would get your £0. It could be that you say, well, the share, I might say the share is £49. You might say the share, you want to get £1. And because 49 and 1 sum to 50, we get to keep our shares. So all of those combinations, 30, 20, 10, 40, those would all be our Nash equilibrium. All of those shares that exactly equal 50. So lots and lots of them. The question is there a focal point here? Are any of those outcomes more likely? So, there you go. There's our £50. You don't often see those. Don't see them in my wallet, my kids and my wife hanging around. They don't stay there very, very long. Okay, £50 then. Behind Diego. What was your name, sorry? Tanya. Okay. This game, Tanya, between you and me, that's £50. If we identify a share for you and a share for me that exactly equals 50, we get the shares that we identify. Okay? Happy? What would you say those shares would be? How much should you get? So there's £50, and you say, well, of that £50, you'd say, well, I want this amount. I will say, I want this amount. And if these amounts that we say exactly equal 50, we get those shares that we identified. So you could say, for example, Tanya, that you don't want anything. And I would say, well, actually, I want £50. And because those 50 and 0 add to 50, I get £50 and you get nothing, because that's what you said you wanted. Yeah? So, of all of these, what is your share, Tanya? You sure? Should we just finish here? There is no right answers and wrong answers. It's just that one, obviously. Of course, it's right. The share I would have identified as well is £20 or £25. Now, why do we do that? Why did Tanya say £25? Why did I say £25? Is that because we're truly, as humans, interested in equality? That we've got this inherent idea, it's in our genes, of being fair. And hence, £25 for you and £25 for me, that's fair. So is that why Tanya chose it? Is that why I chose it? Or perhaps, if I offered you, Tanya, well, do you want £25 or do you want £50? Which would you prefer? 50. You would much rather £50, but why didn't you say that? Perhaps it might be that saying what that share is in front of everybody, and if people say, well, Tanya, she wants everything, how greedy is she? So is it a case that she's truly interested in this idea of equality, or maybe it's the idea that she wants society to think that she's interested in equality, in egalitarianism? I'm sure it's the former, that she genuinely is a generous person, but the whole point is it does not really matter. Whatever reason here, we gravitate towards certain outcomes. And again, that does raise the idea of nature versus nurture. But when my kids were a little bit younger, if I said to them, well, okay, go on, Joshua, here's a little bit of cake. What do you think? I want you to share it with your little brother. Off you go and go and give him some cake. Now, if we take this rationale forward, what does that mean? Well, you share it. Share means half for Joshua and half for Christian. Is that social conditioning? That if you give a kid birthday cake, what will they say? Share with your little brother. It ain't going to mean half and half. It's a little bit for you and the rest of it is for me. So again, it does raise this question, what is behind this? Is it because genetically we're set up to share? Genetically, we were interested in equality. Well, that example of kids, they've got the same DNA as us, but they don't treat sharing in the same way as we do. So it probably is more to do with society and expectations rather than what we're like as individuals. But that makes absolutely no difference whatsoever. We're not concerned about what makes certain outcomes more likely. What we're interested in is that for whatever reason, certain outcomes are more likely. And when they are, they're described as focal points. And factors such as institutions, rules, behavioural norms, and more generally, culture, often facilitate how coordination takes place. And when we gave that definition at the end of the previous lecture, what is a focal point? And I gave that very, very hand-wavy interpretation. That for whatever reason, the outcomes that individuals coordinate on. Well, what leads to this coordination? All of these factors here. All of those games that we went through. And you bring in all of this emotional and psychological baggage. You bring that with you. Individuals, we bring all that with us. And for all of those reasons bundled up together, certain outcomes are more likely. And those outcomes, for whatever reason, that are more likely are described as being focal. They're described as being focal points. And that is what your assignment is all on. That's going to be your 4-minute videos, your 4-minute digital media presentations. Okay. And I did say I'd return to this point. We gave you Battle of the Sexes, and we said that there were 2 Nash equilibria. One, where they both went to the opera, and the woman got her more preferred outcome, and one, where they both went to the prize fight, where the man got his most preferred outcome. And we left it there. We said, which of these outcomes is more likely? Which of them is more plausible? Neither. We just said there were 2 potential outcomes. Change it ever so slightly though. Let's say that we said, got the man and the woman, and they're deciding where they want to go for the evening's entertainment. And let's say that the woman is the dominant personality in that relationship. If that's the case then, isn't it much more likely that the outcome that we would observe would be the one where they both go to the opera? Hand on heart, does the man prefer to go to the opera? No, he would much, much rather go to the prize fight. But because he knows the woman's personality, outcome that they're more likely to gravitate towards, the venue that he's more likely to choose is actually to go to the opera. And has, in that sense then, opera suggests itself as the focal point of the game. Okay, that's it on focal points. If you've got the slides in front of you, there was a nice example I wanted to go through, but we're not going to have time to do that unless we go right up to the end. But we haven't finished yet though. There was something about keyboards and QWERTY and why we use the setup of keyboards that we use. I'm going to skip over that example. And that example is to do with the bandwagon effect. Remember what I said though? Anything that we don't cover in lectures will not be in your exam. So when I put the slides on the week 2 for the web blog, I'll remove these ones to do with the bandwagon effect. What I won't remove though is this last slide. And this last slide draws out the distinction between what are known as strict and non-strict Nash equilibria. Now, virtually all of the Nash equilibria that we've identified in lectures have been strict Nash equilibria. And our notion, our idea of what lies behind the Nash equilibrium is that players don't have an incentive to deviate. And if they deviated, they would be worse off. So in a Nash equilibrium, if you chose a different strategy, you get a lower payoff, you're worse off. Therefore, do you have an incentive to deviate? No. The vast majority of the Nash equilibria that you've seen so far have been of that variety. They've been strict Nash equilibria. If a player deviates, they're worse off. Therefore, does that player have an incentive to deviate? No. However, there's a subtle difference though. That all that's required for a Nash equilibrium to exist is that players have no incentive to deviate. What does this mean? Well, if you deviate, if you choose a different strategy and you get exactly the same payoff, do you have an incentive to deviate? No. Now, if you're worse off, you obviously don't have an incentive to deviate. If you're no better off, there is no incentive to deviate. There's only an incentive to deviate, do something different, if you get a higher payoff. But all that's required for a Nash equilibrium to exist is that the deviating player is no better off. When that happens, we can introduce the idea of a non-strict Nash equilibrium. And this will be the very last example that I give you today. And you can copy it down, but on the sheet, the handout I gave you, that is the last example there, right at the bottom. So this is just an abstract game, played between player 1 and player 2, and then we've got the payoffs, 1s and 0s. So, very, very quickly, how would we identify the Nash equilibrium? For each player and each possible strategy of that player, what's the optimal response of the other? So let's look for the optimal responses of player 1. Now, were player 2 to choose left, what's the optimal response of player 1? You tell me. So wrong player. Is it up? Or is it down? Who thinks it's up? Who thinks it's down? So about the rest of you then? Don't want to think. Too late. The optimal response is? Exactly. The optimal response is both. If player 2 chooses left, player 1 chooses up, he gets a pair of 1. If he chooses down, he gets a pair of 1. Both of them are optimal responses. And hence, I'll put a circle around both up and down. Now if player 2 were to choose middle, what's the optimal response from player 1? Up. And then if player 2 were to choose right, the optimal response from player 1 is down. Exactly. And that's it for player 1. Now for player 2, player 1 choosing up, what will player 2 do? Left and... Yeah, remember, player 2, we're looking for the second figures. Plays left, he gets 1, middle, 0, right, 1. And so left and right are both optimal responses. And lastly, if player 1 chooses down, optimal response from player 2 is middle, exactly. And so where is the Nash equilibrium? Well, there's only one set of responses, best responses that coincide, and that is where, when the top left there. So player 1 chooses up, player 2 chooses left. So that is our Nash equilibrium. Unlike what we saw previously, this is actually non-strict Nash equilibrium. And the reason we call it a non-strict Nash equilibrium is that if player 1 or player 2 deviates, they're no better off, they can't be. If they were better off, that would not be a Nash equilibrium. But if player 1 deviates, for example, from up left, he could change from up to down. And what pair would he get? Again, it would be 1. His pair would go from 1 to 1. Now, does that incentivize him to deviate? No, he's not better off, but he's no worse off. Similarly with player 2. In that Nash equilibrium, he gets a pair of 1 by choosing left. If instead he chose right, he would also get a payoff of 1. So if he deviated, he'd be no worse off. And when that happens, a Nash equilibrium is described as being non-strict. So last thing for today. I said that you've already seen, I said virtually all of the Nash equilibria that you've seen was strict. By suggestion then, that you must have seen a non-strict Nash equilibrium. And where have you seen it? Well, it was that last game that Tanya and I played. That game where we had to split the £50. And I said that 2 Nash equilibria would have been these ones. One where I chose £50 and Tanya chose 0. And the other where I chose £0 and Tanya chose 50. Those are Nash equilibria. Neither of us would have an incentive to deviate. We couldn't make ourselves better off. Those, in fact, were non-strict Nash equilibrium. But I want you to think about how on earth Could that be a Nash equilibrium outcome? If Tanya says that her share is £0, what benefit does she get from that? I win the game, I get £50, and she would get nothing. Would Tanya have an incentive to deviate? I chose £50. She would say, what happens if Tanya chose £1, or £2, or £3?
She won't get any money.
And she wouldn't get any money because
It wouldn't do anything.
we don't win the game. If I'm going to choose £50, it doesn't really matter what Tanya did. If she chose 0, she gets her share £0. If she chooses £1, or £2 and £3, we don't win the game. It's not a Nash equilibrium, and therefore she still gets 0. So this is the point. If she chooses something different, she still gets £0. So those are her choices. Let me win and get 0, or neither of us win and still get 0. That is an example of a non-strict Nash equilibrium.